So the title of this presentation is Culturally Responsive PBS with a Family of Taiwanese Cultural and Linguistic Background. I do have some co-investigators, and I want to share with you them. Catherine Wilson, who is now living in Ontario, was the interventionist working directly with the family. I was kind of an assistant to her. Deborah Olson is a qualitative researcher who helped us do an ethnographic study simultaneous with the single case study to understand culture from an ethnographic point of view so that we can learn how to be culturally responsive. Ishu Ishiyama is a professor at UBC who is an expert in cross-cultural counseling. He served as our clinical supervisor to make sure that we were doing the clinical part with the family well and also making sure we were culturally appropriate from a counseling point of view. And Daisy Wang, who now lives in California as a behavior analyst, was our translator who played a really central role in helping us communicate with the family in the first few months of the study because the mother did not speak English very well. Mandarin was a more comfortable language for her. And so without these other individuals, this study would not have been done and would not have been as successful as it was. But I'm going to step away from that right now and talk in general about the need for culturally responsive positive behavior support services. We've been doing positive behavior support with families now for about 21 years in terms of the empirical literature. There's been 26 studies published. 2 are now in the process of being published. They need to do some rewriting, but 2 studies I've recently reviewed are another examples of positive behavior support with families. And all of these studies show that when interventionists work in collaboration with families, do a functional assessment, build a plan in collaboration with families, and provide implementation support, families are able to implement the plan with fidelity, improve their child's behavior in valued family routines in the home and community, like a morning routine, going to bed routine, going to the grocery store, going to a restaurant, etc., including also going to church. One family worked on that routine across these various studies. However, there's been little research conducted on families of diverse cultural and linguistic backgrounds. Some of the folks doing these studies were working with families of other cultures. For example, Vaughan, Wilson, and Dunlap did a study with a family from Nigeria going to McDonald's. It was very successful, but there isn't too much cultural content in going to McDonald's, unless we can think of North American culture, right? There has been one study focused on culturally responsive PBS to date, and that's by Cheremchinsky, Christy Cheremchinsky, who works here in our community. We're very fortunate that she works here in our community, given her vast knowledge of culturally appropriate process of PBS. She worked with a Japanese family and on a dinner routine, and she was quite successful. But again, very few studies that have actually looked at culturally responsive PBS. This is important because, as all of us know, there's growing diversity in Canada, but also in the US. There's a great need for culturally appropriate behavior support services. Visible minorities account for 79% of recent population growth in the United States and 83% of population growth in Canada. So let's talk about culture. Culture can have a profound effect on the interactions between families and service providers. And I think I should remove the word can. It does have a profound effect. Families raising a child with disability may be influenced by a number of cultural views on child-rearing practices, disability, family roles and structure, and communication styles within and outside the family. For example, a number of Asian families quite commonly don't use praise with their children. And in fact, in Japan, praising your child is not common because, in general, in the Japanese view, the child is part of your family. You are part of your family, so you're one. You're unified in that way. And so when you praise your child, you are praising yourself. And it is taboo to praise yourself in Japan. People just don't do it in that culture. It's a cultural taboo. And so teaching a parent to use praise with their child is a bit of a challenge culturally. In terms of family roles and structure, it might be very common for the mother to have primary responsibility for the child with disability, and the burden on her could be very heavy compared to Western societies in which there might be a more sharing of of responsibilities in terms of child rearing. So these are cultural considerations that have to be taken into account. Communication styles. I'm quite familiar from my work with Japanese families that there's a thing called cultural communication style called hone and tatemae, where hone is your true feeling and your true thoughts, and tatemae is what you will show to the public. And so when you begin this work with Japanese families, for example, before you build the trust necessary to have hone-style communications, it'll be tatemae-style communications, and you may not really hear the true feeling or thought of the parents you're working with because of that cultural boundary in communication that one has to delicately work with to get beyond. Am I making sense? Is this clear? It's very important. A failure to recognize cultural differences can make collaboration and service delivery difficult when providing support to parents. This is commonly known for quite a number of writers who are and researchers who are paying attention to the importance of culturally responsive service delivery. Let's talk about cross-cultural competence. Educators and mental health professionals agree that to establish culturally appropriate services, we need to become cross-culturally competent as service providers. This is a definition by Cross, a set of congruent behaviors, attitudes, and policies that come together and enable a system, an agency, or a professional to work effectively in a cross-cultural situation. So this is at the individual level. This is at the policy level as well for us to be culturally responsive. It's not enough just for a service provider to seek to be culturally responsive. Their agency has to be designed in a way that supports culturally responsive service delivery. So Lynch and Hansen describes 3 elements in the development of cross-cultural competence, and there's a general agreement on these 3 qualities in the literature. First, you have to be aware of your own culture and heritage. You have to know how your culture is affecting you. Otherwise, you're going to be interacting with the family in an ethnocentric way. So if you don't have an understanding of, for example, Japanese culture, when the parent has difficulty using praise, you may just say, well, they're not paying attention to the plan, or, they're not serious about helping their child. No, that isn't true. They're holding fast to a cultural value that's almost 2,000 years old. And you need to know that. One has to respect that. Also, one needs to have knowledge specific to the target family's culture. Now, one can learn a lot by paying attention and being what's called culturally humble in the way one approaches the family, and one can learn a lot. And I'll talk more about cultural humility toward the end of this talk. But one cannot learn everything one needs to know just by paying attention and asking questions with the family. You should be reading literature. There are lots of literature on different families and their culture and the way they approach raising children. I have maybe 4 or 5 books on Japanese culture. I have 2 or 3 books on Chinese culture. And so one needs to expose themselves to the literature. Being the nerd that I am, I have no trouble with that. But I encourage you to be as nerdy as I am in this respect. Also, you have to have the ability to apply cultural knowledge and develop skills necessary to work with the family. Now, one of the writers, very brilliant, very thoughtfully said, no one ever is culturally responsive. One has to approach every family with this question: how will I be culturally responsive now with this family today? You have to constantly raise that question, because whatever you learn to be, however you might become culturally responsive with one family of one culture, you may be then working with another family of a different culture, and you have to relearn all of that knowledge and skill set. So it's a constant effort that we have to put throughout our career to truly be culturally responsive. So now let's talk about developing culturally responsive PBS plans, positive behavior support plans. Chen, Downing, and Peckman-Harding, Deborah Chen, the first author, developed a culturally assessment tool to assist in the design of culturally appropriate PBS plans. There are 3 sections to this tool. There's planning for interaction with families. I think you all may have a copy of this. Is that right? Great. So I'm not going to go through the tool in detail, but I'll just introduce it in general. Also, gaining culturally relevant information. There's a section called Gaining Culturally Relevant Information. And finally, there's a section called, in which you self-evaluate interactions with the family with the aim of developing culturally responsive partnerships. So the last section is a section of the tool that you use continuously throughout the work. I'm just going to briefly show you what the tool looks like. You have it with you. I'll just read one question from each. Like, how do I learn about the family's interactions and communication style? For planning. For family assessment, who are the family members, including the extended family? For example, if you're working with a family of Punjabi culture, my understanding is you have to include the grandfather, because they are the patriarch of the family system, and they have a lot of say in important decisions within family life. If you don't, you're really missing a really important culturally appropriate aspect of your work. And your work may not work because you didn't include the grandfather or the grandparents. And then there's the self-evaluation. What information do I need to help this family? Have I provided information of family legal rights? Are there any concerns about my interaction with the family that need to be discussed or clarified? So you're always critiquing yourself with this question, was I culture responsive today? It's a question that we have to continually ask in a kind of mindful and contemplative way.